Sorry, Barn. It's a shame.
Hey, Andy. Hey, Barn.
Hey, Gomer. Did Wally check the car over?
He went through her with as fine a tooth comb as you can imagine.
All right, let's have the bad news.
Well, he got her running. I brought her over here with me. But she's going to need plugs, points, bearings, valves, rings, starter switch, ignition wires, water pump, fuel pump, oil pump, clutch bearings, clutch plates, brake lining, brake shoes, brake drums, radiator hose, and radiator hose cover. And I give her a good wash, too.
Gomer.
Okay, today what we're going to do is we're going to change our Saab Direct Ignition Cassette, our DIC, or Ignition Discharge Module. And the video is going to consist of three main sections. The first section will talk about a little bit about diagnosis and why you may need to replace this part. Then we'll talk about parts a little bit, and then finally we'll actually show you how to install it. Not a big deal, but there's a few important tips that it'll be good for you to know. So let's get started. Okay, now reason number one is that your car may just quit without any warning. No check engine light, nothing. The car driving down the road may just quit. Or perhaps you go to start the car and it just cranks over and won't start. So the symptoms would be that the car cranks, but nothing else happens after that. Now, there's two other things on these Saabs that are fairly common that can also cause the same symptom. The first thing is your ignition discharge module, which we're talking about today. Your fuel pump can cause the same symptoms, which is fairly common, maybe perhaps not as common as the module failing, the DIC. And then the third thing, the crank position sensor can fail. Not as common as the other two by any means. But anyways, this thought of the car just quitting without any warning is problem number one. And the way to diagnose that is, the simplest thing is just to have a spare one of these, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the video, the importance of having a backup one in your trunk at all times. In fact, at the Saab dealer, we had a blue one of these, which was actually a service department part, which was used for diagnosis. If you had a car in the parking lot that cranked over, it's easier than checking for fuel pressure. Just go out, pop the blue one in, and see if the car would start. And there's your diagnosis. It starts up. If it doesn't, then you go on to check your fuel pump. Make sure your fuel pump's running. So it's that simple, the diagnosis. In most cases, that'll get right to the heart of your problem. Now, that's reason number one. Now, reason number two is the check engine light will come on, perhaps intermittently, and very common, it'll be misfire codes that are, in a generic scan tool, it'll just have the number. I think they're like P1334 and P1335, I think, I forget, but they're manufacturer specific. So if those codes come up, it may not tell you the description, which is actually, the two codes are a misfire for two of the cylinders, like 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. And if you're getting either one of those codes or both, you need to change the DIC. And it's also a sign that it's going and you're going to get stranded. So it's not something to ignore. It's not just a nuisance light. The thing about that misfire is those misfires are usually so minor that you might not even notice that the car is running any different. But they're a warning to replace this part. Now, a third reason, not as common, but if your check engine light is flashing, that's a serious misfire, and that means shut the car off and don't drive it. Because what will happen if your car is misfiring that badly, so much raw fuel will go through the catalytic converter because you'll easily overheat the converter, melt it down, and destroy your converter. And they're very expensive. This is perhaps more common on the V6 car because On the V6s you have two of these, except there's 3 cylinders on each one. And so you've got twice the likelihood of one of these failing. But the interesting thing on those cars, one of these goes out, the car can actually run on the other 3 cylinders, but you're dumping 3 cylinders worth of raw fuel down into your converter, and that'll burn it out. In fact, the code description is catalyst damaging misfire. So, but we over the years we've had customers, they always insist, oh, I shut it right off, but they really meant, they don't want to admit that they damaged their car. What they really meant is they drove 15 or 20 minutes home and then they shut it off, and so they destroyed their converter. So anyways, if you get a flashing check engine light, shut the car off. And now here's a situation where, to avoid a tow, you've got your spare DIC in the trunk. You can go ahead and put that in and see if that fixes the misfire. In most cases it will. So if it's on the V6 and you've got a spare one, you put it in. If you don't have diagnosis tool with you, you may have to try one bank then the other, the front bank and the rear bank, to see which one it is. So that's number 3, and then number 4 is the one that I have today, which is the check engine light comes on and you've got code P0 340, camshaft position sensor. I'll show you the tool and talk about that. Okay, the 4th reason that you'll need to change the ignition discharge module is the reason I have to change mine today. Mine keeps throwing a code P0340. If you can see it there, it says camshaft position sensor. And this one can throw people off a little bit if they don't know. But these actually don't have a camshaft position sensor. This is a signal that the ECU gets from the ignition discharge module, and so whenever you throw this code, that's what's bad. It's the DIC is going to need to be changed, and so mine will keep throwing this code, and it's also a sign that the module's going. Potentially the car could quit. So there's reason number 4. So that's the 4 main reasons that you'll need to change your DIC. Now let's talk about parts. Now talking about the parts, you go on the forums and different things, and it's largely correct. You'll find people insisting just get an OEM, original equipment, DIC, but I'll give you an exception on that. Now, if you go on eBay, for example, you'll find all kinds of sellers selling these for maybe $62, $65, just no-name things. Don't even bother wasting your time. You may figure, well, I'll take a gamble, but just don't do it. They're garbage. The Trionic engine control unit communicates with this thing and the firing or the spark plugs, and it's pretty complex. And everybody's experience has been that these cheap knockoffs from China are just garbage. So don't do it. And that's why people are saying go with the OEM. Now, of course, they can fail too, but they'll last you longer. And they do fail because, it's always been a weak link on these. It's a great system, but they do tend to fail, especially if people neglect changing their spark plugs, which is very important, having the right spark plugs and changing them often. Now that said, what I've done today is I've gotten, this one here is not the one I purchased from E-Euro Parts. It's not an OE Saab one. Those right now are running a little over $200 and on up to get an OE. one, you know, a brand new one. Don't buy. I wouldn't recommend. You know, I see on eBay too. People are selling used OEM ones. But my feeling on that is like, really, what's the point? Because you're just taking a gamble. The thing's already got miles on it. They're prone to failure already, and people are asking fairly expensive prices because it's OE. And so don't. Well, you can do what you want, but I wouldn't buy a used one. You know, and a lot of times they've already had problems, and maybe they're tripping the check engine light or something, and people sell them, and there's not much of a warranty on a used part. But anyways, what I've gotten today, this is Professional Parts Sweden, Pro Parts, they're called, and although this is actually manufactured in Taiwan, supposedly the electronic internals are manufactured in Europe, but E-Euro Parts stands behind these, and in fact they have a lifetime warranty. Not that I'm pushing E-Euro Parts, but they say as long as you own your car, if this fails, they'll replace it because they're trying to build up customer loyalty. So, and you can also get it in a kit. This is the parts kit that I got from E-Euro Parts. You've got of course, the DIC, the Direct Ignition Cassette. It comes with the dielectric grease that you need, and it also comes with 4 screws in case any of the screws are missing, and then you've got your spark plugs. Now let's talk about the spark plugs for a minute. First of all, the original Saab DICs had it right here, a sticker saying use resistor spark plugs only, and that's really extremely important. But I go beyond that. I wouldn't use anything except the NGK plugs that are designed, you know, original equipment manufacturer spark plugs with these things. You know, everything's designed to work together. You want these quality NGK plugs, and go ahead and change them when you change the module. And then I always change them at the recommended interval in your service manual, because when the gap gets too big on your plugs are worn, that affects everything, and it also shortens the life of the DIC. Extremely important is dielectric grease. Anytime you take this out to service your spark plugs or anything like that, and especially when you're putting in the new one, in fact, many companies won't even warranty these if you don't. Each one of these coils, you smear a little bit of the dielectric grease all around the boot on the inside. So very important to do. Now the reason you might need the screws that hold it in is, I've seen this over the years, they tend to back out. And if a car hasn't had the hood open in a while or any service, you may have a couple of them missing, and then the last 2 are backed out, and then there's pressure on the coils on the rubber boots. It'll tend to rise up a bit. So maybe that's why, you know, the kit, they give you these screws, because there's a chance that they're missing. I worked with a really good Saab master tech, and his thing was he would always take these T30 Torx screws and take them out, and he'd replace them with ones that had a 10mm head and a little washer. And I think his idea was that when he put those in and tightened them up, they weren't going to back out, weren't going to back off. But I've always just found that if I give them a good snug and recheck them, you know, every once in a while, that they'll be okay. Now, one other thing, you know, I mentioned E-Euro Parts, and I've had good success getting parts from them. But I'm certainly not saying that's the only place you can get parts. And in fact, I want to mention this about the shipping. I got this for $114, so good savings on that, and I figure it's worth it to go that route instead of paying another $100 plus for the OE one. But what I was going to say about the Euro parts, their shipping. They used to have, I think, free shipping on most items for if it was over $75 purchase. Then I went to $100. But now this last time, when I would just bought this part the other day, I didn't even see the free shipping anywhere. And I found that when you go to the checkout, sometimes the shipping can be a little suspect the way you arrange it. For example, now this is called a kit, but really it's just they've gathered these parts together. And in fact, they were going to ship them in two different ways. They were shipping, like, I forget, the spark plugs and something else were going to come from across the country by FedEx for like $11 or $12 shipping, and then the cassette itself was going to come from their main Connecticut warehouse for like another $11. So it was over $20 shipping, and that was like the default setup for some reason. And sometimes it'll have to be that way because the parts might not be available all at the one warehouse. But you could go item by item and check if it's available. And so when I did a little pull down on each item, I saw that actually all these parts were in stock at the Connecticut warehouse. So go figure. So I went and I changed the ones that were coming, and that was from UPS. But now the ones coming FedEx from across the country, I was able to go and like change the spark plugs and the other to get them from Connecticut. So then they sent everything from Connecticut, and then it changed the shipping from $20-some to like $10. So I was able to get the whole kit for a little over $150. Spark plugs, cassette, dielectric grease, and the screws. So just a little tip on the shipping there and navigating that Europarts site. I don't know. To me, it seemed like your default would be, if they're all in stock in one place, they would automatically come from there. So I don't know if that's intentional and they're trying to pad the shipping, or it's something in their programming of the site. But I've run into other stuff. Last summer I got brake lines, and because of the big boxes they come in, the shipping is very expensive. But I couldn't find any way to combine the shipping on their website. Perhaps if I had called them and talked about it, maybe that way they would have did it, which in hindsight I probably should have tried, because what they did is they charged very high shipping for each line, but then of course when they shipped them they had them both to two lines in the same box, so they made out all this money on the shipping. So maybe calling, they have to do with the number, maybe I should have called and talked to a person personally and explained to them my problem on the website, that I couldn't combine the shipping in any way. Would you do that for me? I'm a good customer, and see what their reaction would be. I don't know if they'd have dug their heels in and insisted on the expensive shipping. I don't know. But anyways, just some thoughts on that. Let the buyer beware. It's a shame things are that way today, but it seems like everybody's got a little bit of a game going on to make more money. So even when I may mention a site as a decent site, it's never like give 100% stand behind kind of thing, because you just always have to use discernment when you buy parts. That's just the way it is today. While we're talking about the parts, you'll notice I have this sitting facing up, so that I could put the dielectric grease in there easily and everything. Now, on some of the forums I've seen people say that never have them sitting upside down because there's oil in here that'll drain down, and it takes like 20 minutes or something. If you flip it over, it takes a while for the oil to come back where it's supposed to be. You can damage them. Now, I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just saying that perhaps if somebody could maybe in the comments below explain where that came from. Maybe it's in the WIS, the Workshop Information System. I've never seen it because this is so simple. I've never needed to look in there to put, to change one of these cassettes. But, in a couple decades of working on the Saabs, working with the fantastic Saab Master Tech, and also I've been to the Saab training schools where they covered like the T5 and the T7 trionic systems. Never have I heard anybody mention at any time about this issue of not having them upside down. In fact, this part that I got, this Pro Parts Sweden, it came in the box. It was actually upside down in the box. And then I've never seen like a label or anything saying the danger of having these, of storing them upside down. Never heard anything from the parts department. Never heard anything from Saab training. So maybe I'm a little skeptical about it. In all my years of doing it, whenever I would have these off for a few minutes, they kind of naturally, sit that way. And I've always, done it that way when I was putting the dielectric grease in the coils. So educate me. Maybe somebody in the comments below can explain where that idea came from and the facts behind that. But you can do what you want. I thought I'd mention that though. Now, on the topic of parts, what to do with the old one. Basically, I'm going to put it in the box the new one came in, and I'm going to use this one as a spare in the trunk of the car. It's a good spare because it was just tripping the check engine light with that camshaft position sensor code, so it'll still run the car in an emergency situation. If I'm out and I have a no start, I've come to the conclusion, they say about don't leave home without it. I say don't go anywhere in your Saab without a spare DIC in the trunk and a wrench to change the screws. Now the T30s that hold it in, there's actually in the kit for the spare tire, they've got a little screwdriver with a couple different ends on it, and they've got a T30, so you can check and see if that's there, and that's all you'd need to change it. But word of advice, always have a working spare, and don't use for a spare if you had one that had of course if you had a major misfire, you don't want to use one of those as a spare, but just one is common enough, that one that's tripping the check engine light. What I like to do is I'll go ahead and label what was wrong with it. It's easy to forget. So I put my P0340 on there. Okay, let's do our installation now. On the spark plugs, it's good to check the gap on them. I've found though with these OE ones, you're virtually never going to find the gap bad on them. They come with the little sleeves on them, and they're always good to go. But the gap is under the hood on the sticker, and it's good to check it. Now I've done the dielectric grease. I'll put it in here and smear it around on the boot with my little screwdriver on each of the coils. Tools I use this with the T30 to take the bolts in and out. Got my spark plug wrench, my little screwdriver might help in removing the electrical connector, and then I like to use an old spark plug boot for putting my spark plugs in by hand at first, down in the cylinder holes are down there. I find it easier to do it that way. So let's put it in. First, take out your 4 T30 screws. There's really nothing to this. It only takes like maybe 5 minutes, but what you got to do is, after you take the 4 T30s out, to access the electrical plug, if you lift it up a bit, move it over, you can get at the electrical plug better. Now here's one of the places you could go wrong. These little sliders, if you've worked on Saabs at all, you'll be familiar with them, but they can get old and brittle, and you can crack them. There's a little opening here where you can get like a little screwdriver or something to get it started. But if it resists at all, you could even spray some WD-40 on it. And then also, as you start it on this end, you can, let me show you, you can press it from this side where it sticks out a little, and if you're pressing on this side, not just pulling on this side, you lessen the chance of cracking it. So I'm just going to take my little mini screwdriver, slide it in there, pressing on the bottom. Then as the slide lock comes out, this will start sliding up at the same time. You pull it off. Not a big deal, but it is something where if you crack this, you know, you'll have a problem securing the plug on there. Interesting. I thought it was the man I bought this car from. You know, the box that he had for his spare Direct Ignition Cassette. I don't know if you can see that. But the Pro Parts Sweden has their label right here on theirs. You know, these ones that mentioned from China, they won't have any. They usually won't have any designation anywhere on them. And of course, the OEM ones, they're labeled down here, and some other places that they're OE Saab ones. Well, I have the cassette off. There's some bolts for the valve cover that you can access, and I like to give those a little snug in case they loosen up a little. These seem pretty tight. I'll just my spark plugs on this old spark plug wire. Ooh. And I'll turn them in by hand. And I'll snug them up with my wrench. The sun's out right now and it's nice. It's a little over 50 degrees. It's been very cold this spring, but this afternoon, well, the winds are going to pick up, gusts over 40. We've had Western New York this year. We've had about 20 days since the first of the year with wind gusts over 40 miles an hour. It's just crazy. But there's a snowstorm out in the Midwest that the edge of it's coming this afternoon. We're going to get a line of thunderstorms and the high winds as the cold front comes through. I want to get my work done on the cars today. Find it easier to go ahead because I don't want to mess with this air intake. I find it easier to plug in the electrical connector. Make sure that's seated all the way. Then there's enough room. Drop it in there. Okay, we've started her up and the check engine light's out and we're good to go. So I'm going to go for a little road test here. The temperature's up to 59 degrees, the sun's out, the storm hasn't come in yet. So I'm going to put the top down and go for a little road test. Yeah, you know, over the years working on cars, one of the things I've always liked when I worked at a European performance shop, you know, I recall times like I'd put a clutch in a 911 race car, real race car, and there was nice country roads around there, so after you did that work, you know, I had to drop the engine out of it, put the clutch in. It was nice to go for a nice road test as a reward for your work and make sure everything was good, and so that was fun. So that's what I'm going to do right now, just take my Saab out for a little road test, and have that feeling of accomplishment.